Thank you. Good morning, everybody. First thing you'll notice is I pull this all the way up. I don't know how he does it. He does it from down here, and he's like this. I'm like, no, I got to pull this all the way up. The other reason is because I like to hide behind it, so you can't see me, right? Right? I'm pretty good. I want to tell you a little something about what happened this summer. As many of you know, September 11th had fallen on a Sunday, and it wasn't a Sunday that we normally would have been continuing to hold our worship service, but the owner came and said, you know what, would you mind doing a memorial service for September 11th? So we said sure, and we did it, and we knew there wasn't going to be a lot of people there because at that time, most people aren't camping anymore. They're home, the children are back to school or whatever. He said, but you know what, would you mind doing that? So we said, great. Come to find out, he had made this big ceremony out of it, and we had about 85 people show up. And I would say 80% of those people were people who were not from the campground. They were people from the town. They were local firefighters and their families, police, military. All these other people who probably never would have stepped foot in that campground to hear a worship service. But God worked through this owner in order to get them to be able to hear the gospel that day. And I say that is because the message I was about to give, many of them, I think, were thinking it was going to be one of hope. It was just going to be all about, feeling bad for what had happened and memorializing people. And as I was thinking about what was I going to speak about, God had something completely different that he showed me. God showed me that, you know what? There are a lot of people out there that are pointing fingers. There's a lot of blame going around at the time. There's a lot of people looking everywhere else about why things like this are happening. Look at our elections. Look at the people we had running. And I'm not here to, I'm just saying, was that the best that America could offer as a Christian country? But I remember God saying to me, who's to blame? Whose fault is it? So it's through that lens that I want you to hear what I have to say today, because this is what God laid on my heart. Abraham Lincoln once said, I've been driven many times to my knees by the overwhelming conviction that I had nowhere else to go. My own wisdom and that of all about me seemed insufficient for the day. Let me read that again. I had been driven many times to my knees by the overwhelming conviction that I had nowhere else to go. My own wisdom and that of all about me seemed insufficient for the day. Do you remember what it felt like that day that it happened, when it attacked? I remember feeling, the first thing you're feeling is disbelief. I thought it was some sort of joke or something. I was listening to a sports radio station, and they were doing this, and I'm saying, that's pretty, that's not funny. And they start talking about it. Then I remember feeling really angry, ready to lash out. Who would do this? Who had the nerve to do this to innocent people? I remember feeling great pain, sadness. But what I remember the most is feeling hopeless and vulnerable. Hopeless and vulnerable. There was nothing I could do. There wasn't a thing I could do. This major tragedy had occurred. And there I was feeling that this was something that would never, ever be able to be fixed. Would never be able to be made right. That all of our lives would be changed forever. It was a done deal. But I also felt vulnerable. That as Abraham Lincoln had said, we as a country were insufficient for that day. Right? Think of how great we are. Isn't the United States the great nation? Aren't we the most powerful nation? The most advanced nation? The most wealthy? Guess what? It wasn't enough. None of that had anything in a way of preventing what happened that day. The question is what happened that day, was it enough to bring us to our knees? Was it enough? Is everything that's going on around us today, is it enough for us to change, to turn back? We just need to look around. Is God's messages just kind of coming and going away? The prophet Jeremiah said this. He had been sent by God, And he was known as the mouthpiece of God. He was recognized as somebody who was a prophet of God, who God would speak through him. He was known as that. And here he comes to the people. And he says to them, you're moving farther and farther away from the one who made you great, the one who's protected you, the one who's been providing for you. He was trying to get their attention and it wasn't working. They had become a stiff-necked people who began to believe that they were sufficient in themselves. Does this sound and look familiar to you? It sure does to me. Look at our families. Look at our churches. Look at our country. Look at how far we've been removed from the way it's been intended in the beginning, the way God had it planned. Look at what is happening in our world. Drug abuse, sexual abuse, kids being neglected. Look at all that's going on. Is this what God had planned for us? At what point do we look at that and recognize that, hey, we're doing something wrong? We're not going in the right direction. Would you say that as a people, not just this church, but the whole church, would you say we're a people that rely more on ourselves, our finances, our wisdom, our strengths? Or are we as a nation more concerned about what God has to say, what he can provide, what he's willing to do? I'll have to tell you, by the way things are looking around us, we're not looking at God, we're looking at ourselves. While most would never come out and say it, the reality is that in fact we are pushing God out and replacing him with our own gods, power, money, earthly status, etc. Jeremiah 8, starting with verse 1, says this. At that time, declares the Lord, the bones of the kings and officials of Judah, the bones of the priests and prophets, and the bones of the people of Jerusalem will be removed from their graves. They will be exposed to the sun and the moon and all the stars of the heaven, which they have loved and served, and which they have followed and consulted and worshipped. They will not be gathered up and buried, but will be like dung, lying on the ground. Wherever I banish them, all the survivors of this evil nation will prefer death to life, declares the Lord Almighty. Again, this is Jeremiah, the mouthpiece of God, coming to them. And yet it still wasn't enough to bring them to their knees before God. It still wasn't enough to shake them out of their spiritual slumber. It just wasn't enough to do that. And as history reports, the great city of Jerusalem is captive. They're taken away to Babylonia. And I'm wondering, at what point will we as a nation fall to our knees and turn back to God? What is it going to take? Will we continue to see the signs that God is sending us fly by without a response? You know that commercial, Can You Hear Me Now? Matter of fact, the guy just changed carriers, so apparently he was hearing something better from somebody else. But do can you hear me now? When he stands over here, can you hear me now? I wonder sometimes if God is sitting there saying, can you hear me now? What do I have to do? Can you hear me? Can you see me? Can you feel me? Can you hear me? Is it enough? And I wonder as we hear that, as we take these like messages coming in as an email, click, delete, and just keep sending it away. How often do we do that? I hope and I pray that we will never be so desensitized to the voice of God that we no longer hear him. And that's a possibility. There are people in all our lives, we are convicted about things, and we become callous. And it no longer carries the sting. When God convicts you of something, generally you feel bad about it because it's something that God has put his finger on in your life and saying, this isn't pleasing to me. This isn't right. But you know what? If you resist enough, eventually we become callous to the hearing. We don't even hear him anymore. It doesn't have the same effect on us anymore because we get so used to it. And my hope as a nation is that we haven't reached that point. Like Israel, we've watched our country decay in front of our eyes. We've watched as the leadership of our country, the ones who are to be setting the tone, being the examples. We see them fall every day to greed, corruption, sexual depravity. We've watched God be taken out of our schools, out of the workplace, out of the very origins of our holidays. We watch as political correctness is taking out phrases like Merry Christmas and God bless you. All this while being a so-called Christian country, which was founded on Christian principles. We've watched our nation be openly mocked and defied. How much more do we need to see and experience before we say it isn't working? You know, I work with families with children with special needs, and you know, and we'll try to come up with a plan for them and try to be creative about ways of helping them out. And they'll say, well, we're doing this, and no, we don't want to try that. We don't want to try that. And oftentimes I'll say to them, well, what are you doing now? And they'll go, and I'll say, how's it working for you? How long have you been doing that? Has it helped? Has anything changed? And obviously the answer is no. Well, I believe that's what God's saying to us now. You're doing all of this. Is it working? How's it working out for you? Again, how much more do we need to see and experience before we say this isn't working? How bad does it have to get before we realize that God has been merciful to us? And I'm going to go off for a second here. And I want you to hear what I have to say here. I think the church as a whole has become so focused on God's love, His mercy, His grace, His promises, all those things that make God great. I am with you. But I also feel that the church as a whole has neglected to talk about the sin, the things that we are doing that caused Jesus Christ to go to the cross in the first place. We've become a people that want to read devotionals about all the things that we want to hear. We don't want to see things that are going to make us feel like that we're being challenged or that we're doing something wrong. We'd much read and listen to something that's uplifting. And I think as a church, not just this church, I'm talking about the church as a whole, we're going in the wrong direction. I think the pendulum has swung. You know, from what I understand in the back, there used to be, was it brim and brimstone? What was it? Fire and brimstone, thank you. Where there was always the condemnation and like that. And now I think we've swung all the way the other way. Let's be friendly. Let's tell everybody about God's love. Yes, that's important. But it's got to be balanced out. The scriptures doesn't say, okay, I'm giving you all of this, but just concentrate on this. This is my word. It's there for a reason. Sin is there for a reason to be spoken about and be challenged. And we need to understand that God is going to discipline His people to get them right back with Him. It's the truth. God is going to do whatever it takes to get His people back in the fold. Wouldn't you? If you had a child that was going astray, if you had a child that was going in a direction where you thought they were going to be hurt or something bad was going to happen, wouldn't you do whatever it takes to be able to get them and try to bring them back? Isn't that why we supposedly discipline our children? Not punish, but discipline. We discipline because we love, because we want to teach, because we want to help them make right decisions. Well, God is no different. He's doing that to us now. And we need to recognize it as discipline to prevent us from hurting ourselves any more than we already are, to get us away from the bad situations. It was interesting to listen and participate in discussions about the conditions of this country, not only back with the September 11th, but even around the elections. And it came down to who was the finger going to be pointed at? So who can we look at today for the situation that we're in? And some say with 9/11 it was the terrorists. And then there were some that say, well, you know, real reason that God is doing this to us is because of abortion. It's those abortionists. No, it's the same-sex marriage. That's what it is. This is why God is so angry with us. And what happened was began to point fingers. And my question is it one of these, some of these, all of these? I believe this is only a small part of why we're going through what we're going. There are too many of us who are double-minded, as stated in the book of James. And it's the concept of trying to live two lives. In other words, the concept of keeping one foot in the world and one foot in the spiritual realm. By trying to take the best of both, and combining them together in our lives for our comfort. And it's easy because as Christians, oftentimes I'll say, well, you know what? I'm doing more than this person. Thank God I'm not as bad as this one. See, so in God's eyes, I may be a little bit above the rest as far as what the United States have to offer. Maybe I have better manners, and maybe I don't swear, and I don't do some of these things. I'm a nice guy. But the bottom line is, when we compare ourselves to Jesus, we all fall short. We've all fallen short. We're all to blame. All of us. We've all had a hand in this. Christianity is a majority in this country, and we act like a minority. We keep our mouths shut, and we don't do anything to step on other people's toes. And that's sad. So my question to you and to me was, how much prayer time have you put in before God about this country? I'm talking about prayer time. I'm not talking about during grace. I'm not talking about before you go to sleep, oh, God, help this country. We see where we are today. How much time have you and I devoted to prayer about the country? How much time have we devoted to prayer about families, about this church, about churches in whole? How much time have we devoted to that? And I'll tell you, for me, it's not nearly enough of what it should be. What have I done to go out and really show the way of love about Jesus? What do I do on a regular basis to go out and tell people about their need for Jesus and salvation? What am I doing? Not as what is everybody else doing, not compared to what other people do. What am I doing compared to what God would have me do? To accuse one particular group of people, or to point fingers at a specific immoral behavior, or to try and group together particular sins by name, is nothing more than a self-righteous act of placing blame on everyone else but ourselves. It's too easy to point fingers. It's easy to sit back and hope that someone else is going to fix things. I'm there, man. I've been there. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I'm sitting there hoping that, God, some way this is all going to be fixed. Somebody's going to do something. Somebody's going to change something. Something's going to happen. I'll be here to watch. I'll be here to receive. Instead of saying, Lord, what part do you have for me to do? How do I fit into this creation? This thing that we need to do. How do I fit into that? And it's always easy to sit back and to presume on God's mercy. Thank God we have a merciful God. Absolutely, thank God. But you know what? Mercy, discipline. Grace, discipline. It's all balanced. And I think we as a nation will never, I think about this, and people say about this all the time. I think that the notion that because we're so great, that we will never crumble, that we will never fall, that we will never get to the place when we are no longer number one, is a fantasy. It can happen. Israel believed the same thing. The Roman Empire believed the same thing. We'll never fall. We'll never crumble. We're too strong. We're too mighty. Guess what? Not only did it happen, could happen, it did happen. And that's exactly what can happen to us if we don't wake up. The evidence is all around us, and it's uncomfortable to think about. It's uncomfortable to examine, but it's reality nonetheless. Interestingly, the scriptures tell us that even after the captivity, even while they were in exile, the people didn't understand why it had happened, the people of Israel. As a matter of fact, it goes on to say that instead of it being their sin, they blamed God. It was God's fault that they were taken. It was his fault. He dropped the ball. He made the mistake, not them. They refused to accept responsibility for their sin and immediately turned and placed all the blame upon God. God had given Israel opportunity after opportunity to repent and to turn back, and they didn't do it. Now, if we continue doing business as usual, I guarantee that God will do anything, as I said earlier, to get us back as his people. So is there hope? Is there hope through all of this? Absolutely. We serve a God of forgiveness. We do serve a God of mercy and of grace. God is a father who loves his children more than anything else. It's not too late. Do you believe that? Do you believe it's not too late for this country to turn around? For us as families, as churches, to turn it around? However, there's something that we have to do. And it starts by looking deep within ourselves, not others, and asking God to search us and reveal to us what we need to do in our own lives. Psalms 139 says, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." It begins by opening up ourselves before God, openly, honestly exposing and saying, "God, show me. Put your finger on it. Expose me before you." But not just doing that, but then helping me, showing me what I need to do in order to do what's right. We have the ball in our court. We as Christians have the ball in our court. We still do. What we're going to do with it is the question. So I'm going to leave you with this. James 4, 8 through 10. It says, "Draw close to God, and God will draw close to you. Wash your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts, you hypocrites. Let there be tears for the wrong things that you have done. Let there be sorrow and deep grief. Let there be sadness instead of laughter, and gloom instead of," my page got stuck, "of joy, when you bow down before the Lord and admit your dependence upon him, and he will lift you up." It is not too late. So what do we do from here? When I was doing this, when I was preparing this, what came to my mind is, what do I need to do to change? Am I ready to rededicate my life to the cause that God had put out before me? Not just doing nice things, not just doing things that I'm already doing, doing the campground is a wonderful thing. It's a great ministry. I love it. But what else? Am I designed just for that? What about all the rest of the areas of my life? Am I ready to listen? Am I ready to give my life back to God and say, "Here it is for you to be able to do this"? The other part about this is, I don't know anybody here what your spiritual condition is, but Jesus makes it very clear that in order to be his, we need to give our heart to him. We need to be willing to turn to Jesus and say, "I need you. I'm a sinner. What you've done on the cross, you've paid the price for me." That when Jesus uttered those last words, "It is finished," he meant it is finished. That it wasn't about works, it wasn't about going to church, it wasn't about going to money. It was about the act that he had done on that cross. Had reconciled you and I to him. But we need to do it in faith. There needs to be a time in our life when we say this to him. I did it on a railroad station coming back. I lived in New York. And I remember coming home, and I remember standing on the Fairfield Railroad Station. I was young. I was 21 years old. And I remember standing on this station, and right then and there, I gave my life to Christ. I said, "You know what? All that I've heard, all you're speaking to me, I'm going to do it." And right then, very simple prayer: "Lord, I want you to be Lord of my life. I trust who you are. Take me as I am." And I'm going to ask if there's anybody here who has never done that. It's very simple. Well, I'm not looking to make anybody nervous or call out anybody or anything. But it's the best decision you will ever make in your life, so that you will be a child of God for eternity. We're going to have some people in the back. Ryan's going to be playing. Pastor Eric's going to come back up. If you would like to accept Jesus, if you would like somebody to pray for you, would you meet them privately in the back? Nobody's looking around. Everybody's going to be looking up here. And allow them to pray for you. If you're looking for prayer to rededicate your life, would you do the same? Would you just go back and ask them to pray for you? Because they will. God bless.